My name is Eric. I'm 29, and I found out my fiancée used to live with my brother on the night of our engagement dinner. Not after. Not before. During. Right in the middle of what was supposed to be one of the happiest nights of my life. We'd been together almost 2 years, and I had never once suspected anything like that. No hints. No slip-ups. She always said she didn't talk much about her past relationships, and honestly, I respected that. I didn't push. I thought maybe she'd had some rough breakups and just preferred to move forward. But standing there in that restaurant, surrounded by our closest friends and family, my brother walked in, looked at her, and froze. And I just knew. I didn't know what, but something in that second, the way his face dropped, the way she went pale, told me I'd missed something huge. The worst part is that it all started so normal. My parents had booked this private room at a nice Italian place. We had candles, music, wine, all the usual engagement stuff. Everyone was smiling, laughing, doing toasts. She was next to me holding my hand, leaning on my shoulder. And then my brother David walked in late, like he always does. My mom had insisted he come, even though he lives in another state now. He hadn't met her in person before, supposedly just seen her on Instagram, according to what she'd told me. I thought it'd be a nice moment for them to finally connect. But when he walked in and saw her, he stopped in the doorway. Like completely stopped, didn't say a word. And she turned around, saw him, and her smile dropped like someone flipped a switch. At first, I thought maybe they'd crossed paths somewhere. Like maybe she looked like someone he used to know, or maybe he was just surprised to finally meet her. But then he looked at me, then back at her, and said, "Her name's Julia?" Just like that, loud enough that the whole table went quiet. She didn't say anything. She just stared at him. Then David laughed. It was this short, bitter kind of laugh. He looked at my parents and said, "You didn't think that was worth mentioning?" That's when the mood fully changed. My mom looked like she wanted to disappear. My dad just closed his eyes and shook his head. And I sat there, trying to understand what the hell was going on. I asked him what he was talking about. I didn't raise my voice, didn't freak out. I was just confused. That's when he looked at me and said, "She's my ex. We lived together for 3 years. We broke up the year before you two started dating." I couldn't even react at first. I just sat there frozen, like my brain was trying to load what he just said. I looked at Julia, waiting for her to deny it, say it was a mistake, something. But she didn't. She looked at me and just said, "I was going to tell you." That's all she said. Not sorry. Not shocked. Not even defensive. Just that one sentence. Like it was supposed to make everything okay. I stood up and walked out of the room. I didn't say anything to anyone. I just needed to get out of there. I walked straight to the parking lot and leaned against the hood of my car, trying not to throw up. My hands were shaking. I couldn't even decide what part hit harder, finding out my fiancée lived with my brother for years, or realizing my entire family knew and never said a word. I thought back to every holiday, every family call, every time I talked about her in front of them. And now I was supposed to believe it was just an oversight? That no one thought it mattered? That it somehow slipped through the cracks for almost 2 years? After a few minutes, my brother came outside. I thought he'd try to explain or apologize, but all he said was, "I didn't know until I saw her." I swear. And I believed him. The look on his face back inside wasn't something you fake. But then I asked him, "Did you tell Mom and Dad?" He hesitated. Then he said, "They knew. I told them months ago when I saw her in one of your posts. I didn't want to stir things up, so I kept quiet. I figured if you were happy, it didn't matter." That made something snap in me. He figured it didn't matter. That I'd be fine living in a lie, as long as I was smiling in pictures. Like happiness is some kind of shield against betrayal. Eventually, I went back inside. I didn't want to, but I had to face it. Everyone was sitting in silence. Julia was still at the table. My mom was wiping her eyes, and my dad was just staring at his plate like none of it was real. I sat down and asked the question that had been stuck in my throat the whole time. I looked straight at my mom and said, "Did you know?" And she nodded. She didn't even try to deny it. She just said, "We didn't want to ruin what you had." I couldn't believe it. She knew the entire time. From the beginning. And not just her, my dad too. They met her, smiled at her, welcomed her in, gave us gifts for our anniversary, and never once thought to mention that she used to be with my brother. that they'd spent holidays with her before, that they knew what her apartment looked like because they'd been there years ago. I looked at Julia and asked why she never told me. She said she was ashamed, that it was complicated, that she didn't want to scare me off when things were going well. I get that fear. I really do. But we'd been together for almost 2 years. We lived together. We talked about marriage. There was never going to be a good time to say it, sure, but silence wasn't a solution. It was avoidance. And the fact that she sat across from my family for over a year, eating dinner with them, smiling at their stories, all while knowing they knew, and I didn't, it made me feel like a joke. Like the only person in the room without the script. Like I'd been performing in a play I didn't audition for. The rest of the night was a blur. Nobody knew what to say after that. The dinner ended early. People made excuses and slipped out quietly. My aunt left without even finishing her wine. I drove home in silence with Julia in the passenger seat, and we didn't speak a word to each other. When we got back to our place, she asked if we could talk, and I said I needed time. I slept on the couch. Not out of spite, but because I couldn't lie next to her pretending things were normal. My head was spinning. Everything I thought I knew about our relationship suddenly had this shadow over it. I started wondering about every story she'd ever told me, every timeline, every trip she said she took. I wasn't even angry yet. I was just stunned, like I had to reprocess 2 years of my life under a whole new light. The next morning, she made coffee like she always did, acting like we could just pick up where we left off. I asked her how long she planned to keep it from me. She said she honestly didn't know, that every time it came up in her mind, it felt harder to bring up. And I guess I get that, to a point. But the more we talked, the more I realized it wasn't just about the fact that she and my brother had history. It was about the choice to keep me in the dark while including everyone else. That's what really wrecked me. The fact that she was comfortable living inside the lie as long as I was. That she could sit next to me at dinner and laugh with people who were in on something I wasn't. That's a different kind of betrayal. Not cheating. Not lying about where she was. Just letting me believe I was part of a story that everyone else already knew the ending to. I stayed at a friend's place for a few nights after that. I didn't pack a bag or make a big announcement. I just left. I told Julia I needed time and space, and she didn't fight me on it. I think she knew pushing would only make things worse. At my friend's apartment, I barely talked. I went through the motions of work, answered texts like everything was normal, but inside I felt disconnected from everything. I kept replaying that dinner in my head, David's face when he saw her, my mom's voice when she admitted it, Julia's silence. It was like my brain couldn't let it go. I didn't even cry. I just felt this constant pressure in my chest, like something heavy had settled there and wasn't going to move anytime soon. David texted me a few days later. He said he was sorry again and that he should have said something sooner, that he figured it wasn't his place once he realized I didn't know. I didn't reply. I didn't know what to say. I didn't blame him, exactly, but I didn't want to hear from him either. Not yet. What could he even say? Hey, remember that woman you thought was the love of your life? Yeah, we used to live together. There's no good way to bring that up. But still, part of me was mad that he didn't try. That he let me walk straight into this without even a warning. And the other part of me was mad that my parents let it happen too. All of them sat on this information like it wasn't a big deal. Like I wouldn't care. Like I wouldn't notice the way everything would eventually fall apart once the truth came out. Eventually, Julia asked if we were still getting married. She didn't say it out of pressure, but more like she genuinely didn't know where we stood anymore. I told her I couldn't answer that yet. Not because I didn't love her, but because I didn't know who I was loving anymore. I had built this entire relationship on the idea that we were building something new together. Clean slate. No baggage. No secrets. But now I knew she had a whole life with someone I shared blood with, and for 2 years she acted like it never existed. I asked her if she still loved him. She said no. I asked her why they broke up. She said it just stopped working, and that he wasn't the person she wanted a future with. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But it didn't fix what was already broken. The hardest part wasn't imagining her with someone else. I've dated people with history before. I've had history too. That's normal. The hard part was realizing I had unknowingly walked into a recycled relationship. That our milestones, first trip together, first apartment, favorite restaurants, might have just been copies of things she'd already done with him. I didn't know what parts were actually mine, what parts were real. I felt like a placeholder in my own life. Like someone she cared about, sure, but not someone she saw clearly. If she did, she would have known how much this would crush me. And maybe she did know. Maybe she just hoped it would never come out. Maybe she thought if she loved me hard enough, I'd never find out, or that I wouldn't care if I did. About a week after the dinner, I met up with my mom alone. I needed to hear from her directly why she didn't tell me, why she let it go on for so long. We sat on a bench outside a coffee shop, and I asked her the same question I'd been asking in my head since that night. Why didn't you just say something? She said she thought it would blow over, that maybe it wasn't serious between us, and she didn't want to get involved in something that might not last. I looked at her and said, "You knew we were living together. You came to our apartment. You knew I bought a ring." And she just nodded and said, "I didn't know how to bring it up without hurting you." That's when I realized it was never about protecting me. It was about avoiding the discomfort. She didn't want the tension, didn't want the awkwardness. So she left me in the dark. That conversation changed how I see her. Not just about this, but about a lot of things. I started thinking about all the times growing up when she'd avoid hard conversations, when she'd let things slide instead of confronting them. It was always framed as being peaceful, but I realized it was just fear. Fear of conflict. Fear of reaction. And I paid the price for that pattern now. She wasn't malicious. She didn't lie with the intent to hurt me. But the result was the same. She watched me build a life on a foundation she knew had a crack in it, and said nothing. And that kind of silence doesn't feel like love. It feels like abandonment. Julia tried to make things right after that. She suggested therapy, said we could go together, work through the trust issues, rebuild. And I appreciated that. I didn't want to throw everything away without trying. We had built a life together. She knew my habits, my favorite takeout orders, the way I like my socks folded. It wasn't easy to walk away from that. But every time I looked at her, I felt this invisible wall between us. Like there was a version of her I'd never really known, one that lived in an entire chapter of her life I wasn't allowed to see. That version of her existed with my brother. And even if she swore it was over, I couldn't know that he'd held her the way I had. That he'd heard her laugh in the same way. That she'd once imagined a future with him too. It made everything feel secondhand. I know that sounds petty, like I was punishing her for having a past. But it wasn't about the fact that she dated someone before me. It was about who she dated and what she chose to hide. If it had been any other guy, I might have been shocked but eventually gotten over it. But this was my brother. My family. Someone I see in photos from when we were kids, someone who stood next to me at graduations and holidays. And she never thought to tell me. That's what made it feel different. That's what made it feel like betrayal. Not because she did something wrong years ago, but because she decided, over and over again, that I didn't need the truth. And maybe that says more about how she saw me than anything else. David and I didn't speak for a long time after that. Not because we had some big blowout, but because neither of us knew how to move forward. Every time I saw his name pop up on my phone, I felt like I was being dragged back into something I didn't ask to be part of. He said he was sorry, but there wasn't much more he could offer. And I didn't know what to ask for either. He hadn't done anything wrong by dating her years ago, and technically, he hadn't done anything wrong now. But the situation was too tangled, too personal. He represented the part of her life I didn't get to know, and every time I looked at him, I was reminded of how blindsided I felt. I think he understood that, because he eventually stopped reaching out. Not out of spite, but maybe out of respect. I moved out a month later. Julia stayed in the apartment. I didn't kick her out. I didn't demand anything. I just packed my stuff and left. I told her I needed space, and this time I meant it for good. She cried. She begged. She said we could get past it. But I was already gone. Not physically, not yet. But emotionally, I had checked out the night I saw her face go pale in that restaurant. I tried to stay, tried to salvage it. But sometimes you don't realize how fragile something is until it cracks, and once it does, you start noticing every other place it was already weak. I didn't hate her. I didn't hate anyone. I was just tired. Tired of being the last one to know. Tired of pretending I could unhear what had already been said. After I left, things got quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful, it just feels empty. I kept expecting someone to reach out and say something that would make it all make sense. Some kind of missing piece that would reframe everything, soften the blow. But that never came. My parents gave me space, which I guess was their way of trying to help, but it just made the distance feel more permanent. Julia texted me a few times. Just small things at first, then longer messages. Then eventually, nothing. I think she realized I wasn't coming back. And the truth is, even if she had said the perfect words, I don't think they would have changed anything. Some damage doesn't get reversed. It just settles in and becomes part of the story. I started going to therapy, not because I was spiraling, but because I needed to process it all with someone who wasn't part of it. Someone who didn't know me, didn't know her, didn't know my brother. Just someone who could help me sort through the mess without judgment. The therapist asked me if I regretted the relationship, and I said no. I didn't. For a while, it was real. Or at least it felt real to me. And that still counts for something. But I told her what I do regret is how much I ignored my gut. There were moments, small things, that didn't make sense. A weird reaction to a photo, an awkward pause when I mentioned my brother's name. I brushed them off every time. Because I wanted to believe in the version of the story that made me feel loved, not the one that would have forced me to ask hard questions. I think what really stayed with me wasn't the shock. It was the slow unraveling that came after. When something big happens, you expect the pain to hit all at once. But this was different. Every day, I'd remember another moment that felt different now. A conversation that suddenly made more sense. A look she gave my brother at a family event. A weird silence when his name came up. It was like finding old photos and noticing something in the background you'd never seen before. And once you start seeing it, you can't unsee it. That's what made it so hard to move on. I wasn't just mourning a breakup. I was mourning the version of my life I thought was real. The version where I was chosen, where things were honest, where I wasn't the last to know. I deleted our photos slowly. Not all at once, not out of anger. Just one by one, whenever I felt ready. There's this idea that you have to burn everything down after a betrayal, but I didn't feel that. I wasn't trying to erase her from my life, just trying to take back control over the pieces she no longer had a right to hold. I kept a few pictures, not because I miss her, but because they remind me that even in the middle of a lie, I was being real. My love was real. My intentions were real. And that matters to me. I didn't fail. I was just working with the wrong information. And now, I get to move forward without carrying someone else's secrets on my back. I ended up talking to David again a few months later. It wasn't planned. We both showed up to our cousin's wedding and ended up standing near each other at the bar during the reception. For a few minutes, we just made small talk, like nothing had happened. Then he said, "You look better." I told him I feel better. He nodded and didn't say much else. Before I walked away, he said, "I really didn't know, man. I wouldn't have let it go that far if I had." And for the first time, I believed him. Or maybe I just didn't have the energy to hold the grudge anymore. It didn't make anything okay, but it was something. We're not close now, not like we used to be, but we're not strangers either. We exist in this quiet space where things are understood, even if they're not forgiven. My relationship with my parents never went back to how it was before either. We still talk, we see each other on holidays, but there's a layer of distance now that never used to be there. It's like I see them more clearly flawed, afraid of confrontation, willing to keep the peace at any cost, even if it means letting their son walk through life blindfolded. I love them, but I don't lean on them the same way anymore. I stopped expecting them to protect me from things they'd rather avoid. And weirdly, that gave me a sense of freedom. The moment you stop expecting people to be more than they are, you stop being disappointed by what they're not. Sometimes people ask me if I'd ever get back together with Julia. I don't think they mean anything by it. They're just curious. And I always give the same answer. No. Not because I don't think people deserve second chances, but because I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what else I wasn't told. That's the part people don't talk about when it comes to betrayal. It's not just the lie, it's the new version of reality you have to live in after the truth shows up. You start doubting your memory, your instincts, even your judgment. I don't want to build a future where I'm constantly scanning for missing information. I want to be with someone who trusts me enough to tell me the uncomfortable parts, the messy chapters, the things that might scare me. Because that's what love actually looks like to me now. Not perfection, just honesty. It's been over a year since that night. I'm in a different apartment now. New place, new energy, no shared drawers or toothbrushes in the bathroom. It's quieter, but it's mine. I don't rush things anymore. I don't skip past red flags or silence my gut to keep the peace. I've learned how to sit with discomfort instead of avoiding it. I've learned that sometimes the people you love will disappoint you in ways you didn't think possible. And when that happens, you don't need to burn the world down. You just need to step out of the fire and stop pretending it's warm. I'm not bitter. I'm not angry. But I'm done being the last to know. I don't really talk about that night anymore. Most people who were there don't bring it up either. It just became one of those strange family stories that no one really knows how to handle. It happened, it changed everything, and then life just moved on. There was no dramatic ending, no big conversation that tied it all together. Just a shift. A moment where the truth cracked open the surface and forced everyone to see what was underneath. And for me, that was enough. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need some grand apology. I just needed to know the truth, and once I had it, I couldn't go back to pretending everything was fine. Some things don't need to end in a fight to be over. Sometimes they just stop. Quietly. Like a door you close and never open again. I still think about her sometimes. Not with sadness, but with clarity. She taught me something I didn't know I needed to learn, that honesty isn't just about what you say. It's about what you don't let someone believe. And that's what I carry with me now. When I meet someone new, when I start to care, I remember how it felt to be the last one to know. And I make a choice not to do that to anyone else. Because the truth isn't always easy, but it's always better than the moment your entire life shifts over one sentence at dinner. I don't need every answer anymore. I just need honesty. From them. And from myself. That's it.